Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you politely to sit down, please, and we'll get ourselves started. So a very warm good morning on a cold Brussels morning to everybody, and welcome to this event, co-organised by Eurometaux and the European Copper Institute, Electricity Market Design, setting the foundation for Europe's industrial resilience. I'd invite you, whether you're here in the room or online with us, ladies and gentlemen, to take a look at my tea bag here, which I found outside. It's entitled Green Energy. Green energy in a bag. If only it was so easy. Now, what are we going to focus today? Well, I've got 3 questions that I want to give to you to start things off. And I'll invite you, our audience here in the room, to raise a hand and give us your views on these 3 questions, just to get us warmed up and started. So, let's go straight in for these 3 questions. Question 1, as much as we hope we can have green energy in a bag, is the energy price crisis over yet? Raise a hand if you think, yes, the crisis is finished now. All is good. I see no one. Okay. Raise a hand if you feel that the energy price crisis is still very much with us, here and now. Indeed. A bit of a loaded question. I see quite a sea of hands. Okay. Indeed, no, it's not over. I think that's quite clear to us. Prices are still high and significantly higher than in competing regions globally. 50%, that's a big number, 50% of the EU's aluminium and zinc capacity currently remains offline, primarily due to high energy prices, and significantly also 30% of silicon too. And we've had the JRC, the Joint Research Centre's report recently published, which predicts that electricity prices will remain high until 2030, with gas continuing to set the marginal price. So clearly the crisis is still very much with us. Question 2, will the EU's electricity market design proposal, which I think we'll welcome from the European Commission, will it help us mitigate these energy prices? Raise a hand if you think yes, it will help mitigate. Tom, of course, hand up there. I'm seeing a few other hands coming, a few maybes. Well, raise a hand if you think no, alone it won't do the job. A good half of our room and 2/3 of our panel, I might note as well. Well, let me give you my answer to this. It's yes and no. I think on a positive side, yes, partially in the long term, I think it can bring some important relief. But let's be practical here. In the shorter and medium term, probably not on its own. So a mix of yes and no for me. And our last of the 3 questions, about responsibility. Clearly, complex issues require complex solutions and also require partnership. I think we can all accept that. And who's actually responsible for taking the action to bring these prices down? Well, in a nutshell, we've got to be bold, and clearly we need partnership. But what I'll underline to start the framing of this debate today, thank you, is that we need a bold partnership approach that goes beyond current policy ambition. So, what are we going to do today in terms of aim? Well, over the next 90 minutes, we want to go beyond just the electricity market design proposal. And the focus here is on solutions, not on defining problems. This is not a new debate. I myself have moderated quite a range of debates around market design, electricity markets in the last 9 months here in Brussels. We want to go beyond that and actually look at solutions to mitigate high energy prices in both the short, medium, as well as long term. How are we going to deliver on that aim in our debate today? Well, we'll do it in 3 steps. In a moment, I'll bring up Tom Howes, advisor from DG Energy at the European Commission, for a brief interview to mine his views on this topic. Then we'll bring up our panel with representatives from academia, from industry and others to dig into this and look at solutions. And then I'll bring up, last but not least, Bernard Respaut from the European Copper Institute to get his closing reflections on this issue. So without further ado, let's get straight down to activity here. And it gives me great pleasure. And can we have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Tom Howes, please? Is the microphone working now? No. Okay, I'll use my handheld. So thanks for joining me, Tom. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you making the time. Can I give you green energy in a bag to start off?
Perfect way to start, thank you.
With the ambition that one day the Commission will give that back to us as well, in an affordable and manageable way. So a couple of questions then, just to set the frame a little bit. Now, we know obviously that the co-legislators now, Commission, Parliament, Council, are in trialogues for the electricity market design, which we're all watching closely. A proposal of measures to accelerate the deployment of renewable, decarbonised electricity and flexible solutions that we need to deal with prices. So my first question, what for you, from the Commission perspective, will the electricity market design proposal do to support Europe's energy-intensive industries during future price crises?
Well, I'd put a flag to come back to later on, the issue of what we did before the electricity market design proposal came out, which is the whole range of toolboxes and emergency measures we undertook throughout 2021, 2022. These were a lot of short-term measures, whether they were reducing our demand, particularly at peak hours, reducing supply, increasing supply, diversifying supply from around the world. The toolkit included things like the improved access to state aid and tax reductions. So there are a lot of short-term measures produced even before we came out with the market design proposal. Mm-hmm. Market design proposal is chiefly reflecting on the way the market works in the long term or the medium term. After a lot of reflection at the peak of the crisis, there was a feeling that the spot market was working. It was sending high prices because of fundamentals in the market and the lack of supply. So in that sense, the short-term market was working well, but we consumers, both households but industry as well, were overexposed to short-term spot prices, and that the long-term market wasn't developed enough. So that's, I guess, the core of the proposal is improving the way the long-term market works, whether that's the power purchase agreement and the need to grow that market, pure hedging strategies, and we're increasing the obligations to have hedging strategies to grow the forward market. And of course, there's the regime for CFDs, contracts for difference, to improve the way renewables and others are brought into the market. So this long-term aspect. We also wanted to improve the way flexibility is treated in the market and grow flexibility. We all know from our models that flexibility is absolutely necessary. The more wind and solar penetration you get into the markets to reduce that volatility and the duck curves or the canyons, you've got to have that flexibility there. So we're taking measures to introduce and speed up the introduction of flexibility. And then there were the measures to protect consumers, whether that's the contract choice, or the different hedging strategies, again, that should be available also to consumers. So these are the elements mainly focusing on the longer term side.
Okay, noted. And I note the points you made about previous action as well. Brings me to my second question, though, with a little bit more of an immediate now focus. I mentioned in my introduction that we have quite significant numbers here. 50% of EU's aluminium and zinc is offline due to high energy prices, 30% of silicon, all of which, of course, are critical materials for the energy transition. So with this in mind, besides the electricity market design, and you've already alluded to this, what is the Commission doing really with this short-term optic? Because you've mentioned a number of policies there already, your flag you planted, but the fact remains that prices still remain high, with the indicator from the JRC report that they will remain that way up to 2030. So what's the Commission aiming to do in this shorter term optic of the next, for example, 6 to 12 months to try and address this ongoing energy crisis?
Well, it's a continuous process. I mean, there's the measures that we introduced already in 2022, even on the renewables front, on the faster planning regimes for renewables, has sped up the rollout of renewables. So you've had a record investment in renewables last year, looks like a record investment in renewables this year. There's the ongoing diversification and growth of LNG supplies around the world. And there we created the platform to facilitate that, the common purchasing agreements to facilitate a reasonable access at reasonable prices. So both in terms of supply and demand, we've been taking measures. These, in a sense, these won't get us back to a regime where we had vast supplies of Russian pipeline gas. we're entering a new world, which is where, as the GRC report says, marginal price will often be set by a gas price, which is an LNG gas price, not pipeline gas price. That's something we have to adapt to. That becomes a constraint. And there are all the other areas, both on the energy side, but also the non-energy side in our markets, where we can play a role and make those work as efficiently as possible. So whether it's the planning regimes, the various things we've mentioned in the Net Zero Industrial Act, for instance. Now that's looking more at the supply chains and upstream, but whether that's on the planning front, on the investment in strategic technologies front, there are also billions of EU funds being made available to support all of this. In every line of access to EU funds, there's money there for strategic investments in clean tech. So both on the regulatory side as well as on the investment and financial side, we're being supportive to make access to capital as cheap as it can be, given the constraints that we face.
Noted, and again, not wanting to sound negative at all. I think many in our audience and in the energy-intensive industries, non-ferrous metal sector, recognize that a lot of effort's being made. But I'll link back to a point I mentioned in my third question in my introduction about boldness. You've listed a lot of policies and actions there that have been taken and are being taken, yet the fact does remain that the prices remain high and capacity is going offline, and may indeed continue to do so. So I come back to this issue of bold in a way. The claim is that some of the policy activity at the moment, as much as it's very welcomed, is not bold enough. How do you respond to that?
I think when you look at, a broader perspective, it's a different perspective, I guess, but the Green Deal overall, the European Green Deal, the European decarbonization roadmap is about the boldest in the world. There are various ways and pathways to achieve those goals, but in the sense that we are driving the global change towards a decarbonized economy, I doubt we could be bolder. The pace of it, I think, is already bold and to some extent alarming. And on the one hand, we're trying to speed up the growth of the renewables, but overall, we hope we're providing a clear vision and not sending shockwaves or surprises to industry about the direction of travel or where we need to go to. So in that sense, I think we're being as bold as you could take. In terms of addressing the short-term market pricing issues, again, we've created new levers. We've been pulling all the levers that we have. We've been working with member states to help them pull the levers that they have, such as taxation. If we've missed anything, let us know. We maintain a constant dialogue with stakeholders, whether it's on the details of market design or the planning regimes or anything else. If we've missed something, tell us what to do. But everything that we've put in place so far is trying to help us cope with the volatile prices, get the market working long-term and short-term to ensure that it's a market-driven revival, and that's the source of growth.
Okay, so I note from that, from your side, you feel that there's a boldness there already with the Green Deal relative to other action being taken, and that the door is open for consultation and the Commission is in listening mode still. Okay. Let me mine down a little to a more specific area now, which is the issue of renewable PPAs. Something that I know in your proposal, the electricity market design proposal, the Commission clearly signals as a huge opportunity. I think that's something that's also a very strong ask from non-ferrous and other energy-intensive sectors. So the proposal identifies the importance of an improved framework for renewable PPAs, power purchase agreements. What steps are the Commission taking and will take to remove some of the existing barriers to renewable PPAs, again, in the next 1 to 2 years, in that more shorter-term optic?
Yeah, well, that's when it already has to happen. I mean, we already flagged up the issues of the need to grow the PPA market in the Renewables Directive, so it's already flagged there in terms of Commission guidance, and that's, I mean, every piece of EU legislation then is implemented by member states, and we support wherever we possibly can in terms of sharing what other member states are doing, what is the best practice, what are the barriers and the best ways to address them. So we have a constant dialogue there. That will be reinforced by the legislation in electricity market design, where we have some specific proposals, particularly on addressing the creditworthiness of off-takers, because this was seen as a fundamental constraint on the growth of that market. And there again, in terms of the design of what a market-compatible support regime looks like to de-risk that market to some extent and help grow it. That's something that there's lots of experts like Leo out there already who are coming up with ideas about what are the appropriate instruments, and we will be engaging with member states to make sure that these are the best practices that are followed.
Okay, so I note that there's a clear acknowledgement there. I think that's something we're all aware of, that there are still barriers. And from your side, you're taking action very specifically to try and address those in the shorter term as well. Which leads me on to my last question in this brief interview before we convene our panel. I mean, clearly solving a complex issue, I referred to this earlier, doesn't have simple solutions. I think none of us see that as the case. And I've been quizzing you about what the Commission is doing, what action you're taking, and the boldness of your action. Let's turn it round now to the non-ferrous metals sector and other energy-intensive industries for that matter. Because clearly solutions are going to be about partnership, bold partnership. So with that in mind, assuming that there is the necessary support for these energy-intensive industries to be successful and competitive in Europe, what do you hope to see from non-ferrous metals and other such sectors over the next few years to demonstrate their willingness and their commitment to the goals you've got in the Green Deal as a whole, in the Critical Raw Materials Act, the Electricity Market Design Proposal, and more? What do you need from industry to help you, in partnership with them, solve these issues, these pressing issues?
I think it's engagement on the regime that we have in place, and that as you say, it's complex and there are many instruments out there. Another one I should have mentioned is the current regime under ETS, but also CBAM, in terms of providing some comfort and a level playing field in terms of competitiveness. But that's on the road towards complete decarbonization. So I guess as well as coming to us with your solutions about how we can best tackle the constraints you face, make use of the instruments that we have at our disposal to help, whether that's regulatory or financial. What more could we be doing to engage in capital markets to help them better understand your issues and your ways out? And then on the innovation side, what can we do with our billions in research money or other EU funds to help you discover the processes and techniques that most cost effectively help you decarbonize?
Okay, noted, noted. Thanks very much, Tom. Could we give Tom a round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you.
Before we rapidly evolve into our panel and some focus on solutions, is my microphone here now working effectively? Okay, wonderful. I'll raise my voice, ladies and gentlemen, and try and use the hand mic. The problem is I need 3 arms here, don't I? Bless, never mind. Right, can we call up our panel now then, please? A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our panel, if we can. And joining Tom, we have Leonardo Mus, the Director of the Florence School of Regulation, Annie Scanlon, the Policy and Impact Director from the Resource Platform, and last but not least, Mads Gustafsson, the Director of Energy at Boliden. Very short pause, ladies and gentlemen, when I try and unfree my hand. Moderators need to take notes, you know. Are we good? Wonderful. Can you hear me now? Oh, wonderful. Can we have a round of applause for the technical team, please, ladies and gentlemen? Excellent. Gremlins in the machine. Right, then let's get straight down to business with our panel. Well, we've heard from Tom, so I want to bring in the others now quickly. Leonardo, I'll start with you. Now, I know from your side, I know from previous statements you've made and papers you've put out, you've welcomed the EU's electricity market design proposal. But you've also, from my side, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've also argued that a bigger reform will be needed under the next Commission. So a little bit in line with the boldness point I made earlier. So with that in mind, just to kick things off, what for you are the priority changes that you think are needed with that bolder ambition? And how do you think we can address these higher power prices in not just the next 1 or 2 years, but also over the coming decade?
Yep. Thanks. Let me start from the study you quoted, right? The study that worries lots of people in the room here,
Indeed.
Right? With these prices set by gas, and then gas, as Tom said, determined by LNG more and more, so quite high prices for electricity. So I hope that scenario will never unfold, honestly. If you think about it, if that's really true, that prices would be like that in 2030, I think there is a pretty good business case to invest some more in renewables and to invest some more in flexibility and storage. And not the kind of flexibility of industry leaving us, but the kind of flexibility that we would like to see that is a bit more sustainable. And okay, if we don't just want to rely on short-term market signals to get that done, I think the proposal already includes elements to get renewables quicker, right? The CFD, the PPA, and all that. And if then we also want to do something more about storage and flexibility to get more of these assets into the market, well, the proposal currently says there is this idea to do it through capacity mechanisms or to have direct support for flexibility, but leaves it largely up to member states. So that's where I think the next reform could be. To go more to the European level and to say, okay, if we really want to, guide investments a bit more. In the past, this was about de-risking utilities, and it was more controversial, especially because some member states wanted to maybe use it to keep some dirty old plants into operation. But if we really want to use these kind of mechanisms to guide investments in the kind of net zero assets we need, to avoid maybe some of these high electricity prices, then let's do it. Let's make these capacity mechanisms more modern. Modern means that they really embrace new technologies and they're not about old technology, and make them more European so that it's not one member state doing something, the other don't, then also member states complaining that one is free riding the other. We don't want that, right? We want a system.
So you see a risk then of fragmentation if we leave it to member state level, and a clear call from you that we need more Europe here.
Yes, and not only more Europe in the short-term markets, as we know them already, where we have been extremely successful. Is the only market in the world that works at that scale so efficiently, but also in these more longer-term mechanisms. So if we want more boldness, it could be not necessarily on the Green Deal, but it could be on security, right? A bit more boldness in Europe on security, and coming out of a security crisis, I think there might also be a ground politically to make that happen. Then the other thing I wanted to mention on the GRC study is that it doesn't yet take into account that we might be able to split up bidding zones, right? It still looks at the current set of bidding zones. And if you think about it, if we really go to offshore, for instance, offshore wind, and we have offshore bidding zones, and we have, or onshore, a separate bidding zone, that's where some opportunities also lie in lower prices, because you might more and more have zones for industry in certain areas where it is really more competitive than in other areas. So that's another thing I think that this study does not yet include. I mean, it's just one study, so it cannot include everything. But you want me to react to it, so there you have my reaction.
Okay, so a couple of clear points for you on the flexibility side with more Europe, opportunities, for example, with bidding zones and more. And we'll dig into those later. Right, Annie, I'm going to motor on to you now. Now, obviously unlocking the value of renewable PPAs, we've already noted, Tom's also acknowledged and picked up on. And it's clearly central to helping source competitively priced green electricity beyond the tea bag I demonstrated earlier. I want to investigate with you very briefly the current state of the PPA market from your expertise, and also a little bit more on those barriers that we know are there. So two little connected questions. What's the current state of play of the PPA market? We talk a lot about it, but where are we with it? And what about the state of PPAs also specifically being signed by electro-intensives, like non-ferrous, including copper?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for inviting me. Just in case no one knows what Resource is, we're a platform which brings together corporate renewable energy off-takers, so the energy buyers, and the energy suppliers. I really liked, Tom, what you mentioned about how we get out of the crisis being a market-driven revival, because I think what we're seeing in the PPA market is really a reflection of that. Corporates are interested in signing PPAs at record rates. Just to compare the data a little bit, where we were in Q3 2022 to where we are now, it's about double in terms of contracted gigawatt capacity. So last October, we were about 3%, 3 gigawatts signed through PPAs, and now we're over 7 gigawatts, which is a really strong demonstration of the interest in PPAs. And this trend is really across all economic sectors, including electro-intensives. So across the whole of 2022, compared to where we are now in 2023, more PPAs have been signed. And we've still got a bit to go in 2023. So I think these are all very good signs. And I think my main message today is that renewable energy power purchase agreements are really a great option for electro-intensives. You know, you require a lot of electricity, right? And I think you're quite interested in signing these kind of clear long-term contracts, so there's lots of really attractive things there, but indeed there are lots of risks, and risks specific to electro-intensives as well, particularly around kind of shaping those variable renewables to your base load capacity, and that really can involve significant costs. There's also kind of broader barriers which companies face. It's really across all industries, both large and small companies. It's not particular just to SMEs. So things like the lack of availability for renewable energy projects. So, these supply chains of clean tech are really important to improve, to just make sure we've got the level of solar and wind available for corporates to sign through PPAs. Other risks include credit risks, like proving the bankability of signing a contract that can be around 10 years long. And then other things like lack of grid connection. If your plant is not properly connected to the grid, that can also prevent you from signing a PPA. On the kind of policy side of things, Tom, I really like that you mentioned as well, proper implementation of the tools that we have. The implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive, I think, is really, really important. We can't have PPAs if we don't have a very healthy renewables market. So things also with that include permitting, grid investments, and RED also included granular certificates for more detailed accounting of your green electricity. So there's loads of good stuff there. And then today, obviously, the topic is the market design reform. I think the big positive there is, particularly from the Commission, really the positive support for options like PPAs. This is really great, and I think we would not have been having kind of the same conversations a few years ago. So thanks to the Commission for that really clear steer of where we're going. And I think in essence, it's a big opportunity, but there are some risks, and I can go in a bit more detail later if you like. Because I think particularly for electro-intensives, there are some things that need to be tweaked to really make sure that this is going to perform well for your industry and really help you to sign more renewable electricity. Just a kind of high-level overview, I think particularly in the Parliament's position, what we're seeing is that a kind of sense that only SMEs face barriers when actually all corporates face barriers, and also a kind of zoom in on certain risks and not mentioning other risks. So as I mentioned, shaping is a really, really big risk for the electro-intensives. That's not mentioned at all.
So a clear opportunity perhaps to widen the scope of the issues that are considered then from your perspective.
Indeed. Particularly in the Parliament's position, they've mentioned just that, credit default is a risk, but actually shaping is a really, really important risk. So I would suggest we work together to broaden that out and really make sure it tackles all of your issues. Because I think maybe just to conclude, I think it is a good time to sign a PPA. I know we're still really experiencing issues from the volatile markets, but PPA prices are dropping. Maybe not sign your whole load, but I think you can sign a bit of your load under a PPA today. That would be a really attractive option. There are lots of market tools at your disposal. Multi-buyer PPAs, energy pooling, other, like making sure that you have a renewables portfolio, so you have both solar and wind, which are really compatible. There's business opportunities out there. It's a good time to talk to renewable energy suppliers, and that's a really practical thing you can do today to really move away from the crisis.
Okay, so we've got a growing PPA market with some positive signs. You've identified some key barriers like lack of availability, credit risk, lack of connectivity, but I'm getting quite a positive message for you about opportunity there. Right, Mats, let me bring you in. I mean, clearly Boliden, wider metals industry, essential to supplying the raw materials we need for the energy transition, that's clear. But on the balance to that, I can only use the term existential crisis when I see numbers like 50% of capacity offline. So you're facing a real honest challenge when it comes to continued high energy prices. So going beyond this electricity market design proposal, what do you need now and from the next European Commission to make sure that you can expand production, not curtail, but expand production in Europe and help deliver on the Critical Raw Materials Act's goals and do it with green and affordable energy?
I don't really recognize myself in what has been said so far. I'll come to that. We need cheap electricity, and we need predictability. We need security of supply. Our investments are long. and they are quite big. So we need to have some kind of a predictability. Talking about PPAs, I don't recognize this at all. We can't buy a PPA because baseload is not available on the market. Nobody's willing to take the risk. In the north of Sweden, where I come from, we have this Nord Pool 10 years forecast of price. There is no liquidity. Nobody knows where this goes. Saying that means that our industry is trapped because we can't survive. Tom talked about flexibility was an issue. One thing should be sure, we are electric intensive. We have been working with energy efficiency since we started. I don't say we are world class, but we are very close to be world class in efficiency. We are saving every kilowatt hour we can. That's the key point. But PPAs as a tool worked a couple of years ago. I have personally signed 4 based on wind power. But our industry need base load. Shaping cost is killing that. The other thing is capital cost. And if Tom say that financially there are money to pick up, why don't use it? Because the security of cost of equity is the key point. And return of capital. It has nothing to do with market. And that means that the producer need to sacrifice some revenue. Maybe the buyer need to be able to accept a higher price. But that's not the case. Because there are another factor that plays in. And that is the marginal price setting. And as long as that lives, the producer have a choice, earning much more money. Adding to that, in marginal price setting, we are using carbon cost. And carbon cost goes up, which means electricity price goes up. And as an industry and as a buyer, I don't get the business case here. I can't see why the producer of wind power should give away a lot of money to me for whatever reason. So that's my view so far.
So for you then, the elephant in the room is this marginal price setting, and you see that really, it's really a limiting factor right now for you.
It's a counterproductive in that way.
Yeah.
And as I said, PPAs, from my knowledge, is signed due to return of capital, nothing else.
Okay, so you see a different picture with your practical reality from a Boliden point of view in terms of the reality of being able to access PPA, and you've raised that point also of the marginal price setting aspect. And for me, that means quite a fundamental shift that you're asking for, though, in the way that the market is designed.
I think we need to dig into the fundamentals.
Okay.
And we need to accept that. And I know it's going to be tough, and I know it's going to be a lot of compromises, but we need to do it. And if I can just speculate, if there are signed PPAs today, they are probably more or less pay as produced. I've been asking around from the big suppliers, they are not giving offers on baseload any longer. And this needs to be solved one way or another.
Okay.
Because as you said also in the beginning, we are looking to grow. And there are ambitions from the Commission to have us grow. But we cannot grow if we don't have access to the commodity fossil-free electricity. That's impossible.
Okay, so you see this as a key handbrake. Tom, I'll bring this back to you. So, I mean, Mats is saying there that on the one side, there's the desire to grow, to meet CRMA goals, but there's this elephant in the room of the fact that the PPAs we want to have available are not there. And the point of marginal price setting has been raised as well. I don't know what your reflections are on that.
Several. Firstly, in terms of the way the market's working and the role of marginal cost in terms of setting price, that was a discussion we had at length when we were drafting our proposal. And alternatives of price regulation were never seen as better models. than the way the market normally works for every commodity, including yours, around the world. So in that sense, that's why I was saying earlier that the short-term market's working. In terms of changing it and getting you access to the cheaper renewables, ideally as baseload, or at least as part of your portfolio, as you were saying. Again, if there are other levers we can be pulling, we will. But in terms of the rollout, the rollout of renewables has never been faster, and we're trying to make it faster. The access to other forms of pricing, whether that's if there are better alternatives to PPA models or hedging techniques, we'd foster that as well. I think we're not dogmatic. We're trying to make the market work as effectively as possible with whatever proposals come up.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, just a comment. We have, as non-ferrous metal industry, we have come up with several suggestions to change the market, marginal price setting, and that has been reacted. You have not responded to that. And I think I've been talking about this issue for the last 7-8 years, and I'm glad that this is on the table now, so people start to listen anyway. But this is fundamental, and also this with the price of money when you're talking PPAs. Something needs to be done, and there are possibilities. There are tools. You have the European Investment Bank. You have plenty of possibility to make out guarantees, even to guarantee the shaping cost to make things happen. And I think that's the crucial, because in my view, the coming 5, 6, 7, 8 years is the most important. My company is now moving all the way to electricity in all mining operations to get rid of using fossil fuel. But things will start to stop us due to high cost. We have put Europe's biggest zinc mine in care maintenance in June this year. 650 people because of high cost of LNG. That's an example. And the only tool that was available was that the country you were operating had a possibility to help you with money, and that is now taken away. So, in my view, that shows that there is no really saying that the crisis is not over, but you take away the only useful tool that was on the table.
Okay, I'm going to bring in now Leonardo, I'm going to bring you in, Annie, I'm going to bring you in, and then Tom, I'll come back to you on that.
Yeah, so I didn't start by congratulating Tom, but now I should, because if we're back at discussing these kind of proposals of bold market design reform, leaving away market marginal pricing, then I have to say what we actually wrote in that brief you referred to, which is to congratulate the Commission that they have been able to resist these kind of proposals, because we are really convinced that these kind of proposals are well-intended, but would create more damage than good. So I think on that, really marginal pricing is just the way markets work. There is nothing to do about it. But normally, if marginal prices are so high, you would get investment, right? And things would normalize. But if you, for some reason, think that utilities won't do these investments, I think anyone is just able to step into that market and do the investments. If it's really true that we think prices will be so high all the way to 2030, I would jump into that business and start investing myself. And there have been industries that started to invest in assets, right, themselves, renewable assets. If they think PPA contracts are too expensive, you can invest yourself. Of course, as you said, your shareholders will look at that type of investments in comparison with other investments, and they might decide to leave Europe. But that's a different discussion. Then we really were talking about saving certain industries, right? If that's really necessary, that has been done before in certain situations that certain industries really needed to be saved, and we wanted to save them. Then more controversial is, do we really want to, do industrial policy and let certain industries flourish, right? And that's always a tricky thing. How much are we willing to do that? Are we going to copy the US, or do we think the US will stop doing it after a while? And this is a conversation to be had, but to go to more bold market design, changing marginal pricing, for me, is really not part of the solution now.
Okay. Annie?
I mean, you know, we're at quite a difficult moment, right? We're 7 years away from the first milestone of climate neutrality. We're meant to be sourcing 40% of our energy from renewables, 42.5, I think is what we landed on, the Renewable Energy Directive, in 7 years. So basically, we need to be building the wind and solar farms today in order to get there. And there are many, many challenges that are blocking that. But what is helping is really amazing. Obviously, there's big demand for green electricity, and this shows that we just need to be working closer as the energy supplying industry and the corporate off-takers. You know, marginal pricing, you know, this has really paved the way for us to build more wind and solar in the past years. It's created a business case for the renewable rollouts. And this is how we incentivize investment in solar and wind, which I think everyone agrees we all want. But indeed, there needs to be more support for corporates to be signing those PPAs. We think that's a really attractive option for companies that want to sign these very long contracts and have that oversight of costs over a long period of time. But indeed, there need to be some tweaks. And I mean, by the way, there's also very, very good examples already in your industry. I mean, Alcoa is an aluminium company. I think they're in the top 10 of companies that sign PPAs today. They have quite a nice story of their plant in Spain, which has actually been able to reopen operations in part because of a PPA that they signed. So I think with the right frameworks, we can really help corporates to sign more. But clearly there are challenges. And I think with the market design reform, you know, there's a piece in there on things like guarantee schemes. You know, these are tools that we should support and help more companies to access these kinds of procurement.
Okay, clear. And Tom, I'll bring you back in just to reflect again on some of the points that have been raised.
Well, at the beginning, I mentioned the short-term measures we were promoting and encouraging member states to take. And these included the subsidy regimes. There was a general relaxation of our state aid regime, reductions in taxes that were levied. And these certainly help cope in the short term. And regulated prices can also help cope in the short term. What they do to investment signals for everything else around it doesn't look great. So that's also why I come back to the point of how do we make the market deliver as much of this as possible. You're right that there are limits to the coffers, to the budgets that we have for subsidies, so that the state aid can't continue indefinitely, and the regulated prices, which are also being subsidized, as well as destroying investment signals, can't carry on indefinitely. So if we are coming to the end of the useful life, if you like, of these tools, what are the other elements at our disposal that we can pick up? One aspect we haven't mentioned is adapting to the new electricity markets world, where it is dominated by wind and solar, where baseload is more difficult to manage, but if you bring in the flexibility dimension to that, the flexibility on the demand side is another can be a very significant factor in how the future electricity market is going to work. And can your industries play a role there and profit from that change in the structure of the electricity mix? That's another aspect to explore and see how the industry could cope with that. So fundamentally, we sympathize. If there are instruments out there that can help make this work better, we want to know about them. But there are limits and constraints to the role different instruments can play.
Just to comment there is, I agree with you in the flexibility point of view, but facing the reality now is that the industry have certain possibility to be flexible, absolutely, and we can improve, I fully agree. But then you need to make a choice. Should I produce my product or should I be flexible to the grid? And this is a business decision, so to say. Already today in my company, we are very flexible. In Finland, we are supporting the grid because it's a capacity issue, and it was even worse before the Olkiluoto 3 came around. And we get paid. We are happy, but we lose production. So that's a choice you need to make. In a mine operation, you can be even more flexible, probably, and we do that. And now marketplaces started to grow, and we accept that, that's fine. But the point is, shall we grow, we need more electricity. And we can't grow on flexibility. We need to have more volume. And I still say that the electricity price is much too high. And maybe it's so that we need to accept a totally new level. And then the existing way of producing as we do today is not here because it can't survive. Non-ferrous metal is a price taker on the world market. We are not set the price on our metals. We need to adjust. And now metal price goes down, and we need to have a level to survive. And that's why, as we said before, that aluminum goes down and close and things like that. That's the reality. And I think that's wrong. I think we should, coming back to that again, even if I don't get the support I like, we need to focus on how we set the price on electricity. And now Europe suddenly, more or less, accept that we need nuclear. This has been, I've been involved in nuclear since 15 years. And now we have an acceptance for that, more or less. That is not coming for free, right? Here we're going to face new terms because they probably want to get paid for capacity, which we are taking away with the volatility with renewable. So the complexity is going to grow. So I mean, we need to discuss this now before it goes too far. Because what's going to happen with the industry is you postpone your investment, first the reinvestment, then the investments, and then you're gone. That's what's going to happen, because we can't swallow that cost. That's impossible.
Okay, so a clear and present issue.
Just one thing more. This you talked about using storage. I mean, the cheapest way of storage electricity is to store water. And there are very few places you can do that. Then you need to go to hydrogen, you need to go to batteries, whatever. We have worked with that, and that adds a lot of cost still. And I would say for the coming 10, 15 years, that's going to be very costly. So that's not coming for free.
Okay,
just a remark.
Now, I'm going to open up now to our audience for some questions, and also our online audience. So if you're joining us online, you note on the screen here you can see. You can join us on www.slido with the code #RawMaterialsEU, and feel free to feed in some questions. We've got a few already. I'm going to open up to the room here. We've heard a certain amount of discussion around. I see a little bit of difference, a different positional point of view here. On the one side, we've got a lot of positive things going on, a lot of positive suggestions. On the other side, I'm hearing from the industry perspective that we have a clear and present issue that doesn't yet have a solution. Do we have any pending questions in the room before I go to our online questions? Okay, well, I'll pick up on a few of our online questions. I'm going to go with the first one, taking maybe a little bit, or now the second one, a little bit of a wider optic. We often focus very much on a European angle here. Let me widen it. The US IRA is subsidizing CapEx and OpEx costs with cheaper energy. And we've got targets in the EU, but we haven't got the wider framework. Tom, I'll put this to you first. Is there anything or something that we can learn from the Americans' Inflation Reduction Act that can also be applicable for us here in Europe?
I think to some extent the Inflation Reduction Act is catching up with where we are in terms of having significant, even larger sums of state aid available to their industry to boost green tech in the US, which is traditionally way behind the development of green tech in the EU. So to some extent, there's catch up, but there are large sums of money there, and how those will be managed, whether, again, we've had an historical state aid regime. We're making the maximum use of that we can. I don't know other aspects of, and it's still being implemented. We'll see how it evolves, how it is implemented, to know whether there are things we can learn from it. Hopefully there are. But in terms of all the other dimensions to European policy, I mean, in terms of the long-term stable framework, you know that we're decarbonizing. You know where we're expecting to be in 2030, 2040 soon, and 2050. You know the legislative regime that we have in place to do all of this. The frameworks we're putting to support either domestic production or EU competition vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and CBAM and ETS and so on. So in terms of providing a very clear, long-term, hopefully stable regulatory framework, the financial incentives, whether it's the EIB or Commission or member states, the billions that we have access to, I think we have a lot of different tools on our platter, and I'm not sure that the US is doing anything particularly different or particularly new in that sense.
Okay. Leonardo, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, let me start with a disclaimer. I'm still getting into the IRA in detail, but from what I understood so far is that it's a bit of a bold move in the sense, and you could compare it to when we started with subsidizing renewables. We had a long discussion on, do we want to be effective or efficient in our subsidies? And some countries went for effectiveness, but that had a limited time period, because at some point people start to ask questions. You are over-subsidizing certain technologies. And then, yeah, that has resulted in some backlash also in Europe, right? And I feel that today in Europe, when it concerns renewables, we're really concerned about over-subsidizing all the way to having two-way CFDs as the new way to go, right? So maybe also the US is now catching up, but catching up, also making maybe some of the mistakes that we made in the past in maybe over-subsidizing. And then the question is, how long will that last? Then the second aspect is that, yeah, we're worried that industry is leaving Europe, but they could also at some point start to look at their subsidy scheme and say, why are we subsidizing European companies to come here and do certain things? So, I mean, it's not that easy, I think. But of course, if the IRA is there to stay, and we don't want to lose in this whole strategic autonomy space, so I want to keep an open mind, and I think we really need to have that conversation in Europe. It's normal that we only started. It was introduced at the end of the mandate of this commission, but it's, I think, one of the key topics for the next commission to pick up. Where do we want to go? How far do we want to go? Do we want this to be a kind of Apollo project for Europe, or are we more skeptical? And do we think the IRA is not there to stay, so we don't have to do anything in that space? It's really, for me, it's really open, but a very important topic to touch upon in the next mandate, and I'm sure it will also be part of the elections, right? The discussions that will take place.
I would imagine so,
level.
yeah. Let me come to another question here, and here, directly to you, Tom. Commission needs to answer the question, where is the business case? This alludes a little to some of the points Matt's made. Where is the business case for energy-intensive industries to invest in the EU?
It's not quite where it's been traditionally, insofar as we have traditionally had higher energy prices than the US. By tradition, these have been double. Our electricity prices have been double those of the US. Now they're 3 to 4 times. So we're in a very, hopefully, exceptional circumstance. And with all the different policies we've been talking about, we're trying to bring those costs back down. But we are fundamentally, we're not a fossil, cheap energy rich region, but we still have the energy intensive industries that we have despite that, by being ultra efficient in every single other aspect of industrial production. So we're very efficient in all sorts of ways. And the more we move to a decarbonized energy sector, then the better off we become, because we do have the comparative advantage in our renewables sector. So that will bring our energy costs down, not according to the JRC model fast enough, and certainly not as fast as you'd like. But one of the whole arguments of the growth of renewables is the beneficial cost impact that will have on our electricity sector. So through looking at all the other dimensions of industrial development, whether that's on the regulatory front, on the planning front, on the skills front, these are all levers particularly through the Net Zero Act we're pushing. But yes, we do want to keep our energy intensives here. They're a fundamental part of our strategic economic interests.
I think we're dancing around an elephant in the room for me slightly here, marginally, dare I say. That on the one side, we've got a Critical Raw Materials Act that says raise production, raise domestic capacity. And on the other side, we have energy prices, which you mentioned yourself, are multiples higher than other competing regions. And that strikes me as a very difficult thing to balance. So my question is, how are we going to better balance? Because I see with the statistics around the amount of production that's currently offline or partially offline, that balance is not yet where it needs to be. I see a significant risk of short to medium term leakage of capacity, and I haven't yet heard a way in which I can see that balance being readdressed. So I'm going to turn that around now with a positive optic here. What are the solutions to this? How are we going to address this? Because I get the impression it's not yet currently really being addressed. So let me shift to that. I'll start with you, Leonardo. What do you see as primary solutions here?
Well, one thing, I still want to say something positive about the electricity system and market in Europe. Especially if you take a forward-looking perspective. So what are they mainly worried about in the US is the lack of transmission capacity. And they are, sometimes almost envious of some of the NSOEs, this type of, organizations that we've set up. They're far from perfect in Europe, but I have a feeling sometimes that we've achieved already more in, first of all, the scale at which we have to cross-border trade and the infrastructure we have for cross-border trade. And the more you go into renewables, the more that is valuable, right? To bring cheap power to where it is most needed. So I don't know if it's that bad on the price level. Then, of course, you make a correct point. As I said also, I think this is a new policy domain, no? The critical raw materials, the Industry Act. So it's maybe not so strange that in that initial development, it's more about targets, but not yet the details of the policy. Yeah, in the end, I think it's about money, no? How much money do we want to put in these type of policies? And for the moment, that money was not easily available, but when you have a new multi-financial framework that we're going to discuss, then the question is, how ambitious do we want to be as Europe? And to be able to determine that ambition, I think it is very needed that we do a good strategic analysis, because we currently have targets that are the same for all materials, but what are some of the risks we are exposed to? Are they the same in all materials? Where do we really want to invest? If we need to invest in our strategic autonomy, I think there is still a lot of discussion needed, but it's clear, if we want to keep that industry, we have to do more.
Okay, so we have to do more, but where would you suggest specifically more could be realistically done? Because clearly there's a feasibility question here as well. In an ideal world, we can make a long list of things we would like to have. I could myself personally make a very long list of things I'd like to have. I'm not going to get them all, but I think some things are more feasible than others. So if you had to cherry pick a little, Leonardo, what would you focus on?
Well, we come out of a security crisis where we knew, right, that we were dependent on Russian gas and that there was a security risk, but we never took it really seriously enough, clearly. So what's the next security issue that we want to handle? I don't know. I really would have to work with the industry they probably know better. Where do we really want to, manage some risk we might face? And that's where I would put the money. And does that mean a bit of money in all materials or more centered? I don't know. I really don't know.
But clear from you then, a better strategic understanding and a more focused approach to deal with the real challenges. Mats, I'll open that up to you. What do you see as primary solutions here?
I can just say, like, for example, the critical raw material, very focused. So we need to bring up more metals or whatever. Problem with most of those strategic critical metals is that they have no off-taker. They have no price, right? So normally you look for copper, for example, and you can add those. And if you're going to start a greenfield operation in mining, we are talking 10 years preparation, something, a lot of money. And before any board of directors taking that decision, they're going to ask me, for example, what's the OPEX? Because this mine needs to be fully electrical. No fossil at all, okay? Not to the mine, not from the mine, not in the mine. So please give me a price. And I say, I don't have a clue. And they say, we can't invest. And this is the reality. This is what's happened in the board of directors room. And my company made it huge, the biggest investment ever in Norway last year. And that was based on a 15 years contract PPA. But without that, it should never happen. And in Norway, it's still doable due to the circumstances, so to say. But my point is that we need to dig down, and I'm quite stubborn. We need to focus on marginal price setting. We need to address the equity thing with renewable, and the whole renewable industry need to accept a new situation on the market. And the consumer probably need. But today, if we say price, we are used to price 50, whatever, and the cost is 100, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Okay.
So we need to meet each other.
Yeah, so there needs to be a little bit of movement in that.
Everybody
Quite
needs...
a significant movement.
Exactly,
from your
but we
point of
need
view.
to start to talk to each other. That's important. We need to listen to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because the industry, in my view, the industry have adopted the target from the start. And we are moving in that direction. But cost is going to kill us. And that's my point.
Okay, clear. Annie, I'll bring you on this as well. Reflections from your side.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, the more that supply and off-takers can talk together, I think we find the solutions. It's going to be a big challenge to get the level of renewables we need. We need that investor-friendly environment. And clearly, the ultimate goal is really to reap the benefits from solar and wind, which is the cheapest electricity to produce. That's what is going to deliver the low prices. As more renewables come online, suppliers will be evolving the offer that they have. There will be a move towards baseload PPAs. They'll be using a range of portfolios, storage. This will be an increasingly sophisticated PPA that we're going to be seeing in the markets. To unlock those renewables, there's a lot of policy conditions that need to come from that. So, really accelerating the grid so we can really get that electricity to the point of demand. Permitting is still very slow, but, good signals from the EU that that's moving now. And then, really I would say make the most of the solutions that already exist on the market. We're seeing lots of examples of companies clubbing together in multi-buyer PPAs, things like this. So, things we can do right now. Clearly, it's a very serious situation, and don't want to, undermine that at all. But I think, the more we can work together and just really make the most of the solutions out there.
Okay, clear. Leonardo, anything you want to add?
No, I think you already want me to wrap up? No.
To a degree, yeah.
So to wrap up, let me just say that I'm here humble. I think I worked a lot on electricity markets, and I understand these arguments, let's just fix everything through electricity markets, but I hope I tried to convey the message here that all these fixes often create more problems. So there are, only limited solutions within the electricity market. That's why I'm here to learn also, to learn about what's going on in industry, how this Net Zero Industry Act can evolve, how critical raw materials can be better managed. And that's where I have to learn. And I hope there we can find some more solutions for the industry. And I hope maybe some of the elements we raised here gave the industry some more positive view of the ongoing market reform, that there are no such easy fixes there, but there are still some instruments there that can help, I think.
Noted. So, again, keeping a positive tone to this. And our focus today obviously is on market design and beyond, with this idea of setting the foundation for industrial resilience. But of course, resilience is clearly eroded by high energy prices. So we've heard some good suggestions about ways forward in terms of collaboration, strategically being more focused on where we need to do specific things. We've heard the idea also, of course, around suggestions from industry about how we can do this. Bringing things to a little bit of a conclusion then, Tom, based on what you've heard and also your own viewpoint, I'm intrigued to know what you see as the next necessary steps, alluding a little to one of the questions from our audience. What needs to be top of the list of the most important things, not only for this current commission as it comes to an end, but the next mandate as well, in terms of resolving this real and pressing issue of high energy prices?
Oof, I hope we don't wait until the end of the next commission to address that. No.
I think we all share that, yeah.
Personally, from my part of the institution, our top priority is a successful conclusion of the electricity market design legislation. Let's put the legislation to bed. We put that to bed, we resolve all sorts of uncertainties, we get more clarity, and then we can focus on implementation, and it is implementation of all the different instruments that we've talked about this morning. It's implementation which is going to make them work and work effectively. And we need you to come back to us to explain why the 5 different PPA models that we come up with are not addressing your needs, and we need a 6th, or how do we improve the hedging regime? All the different things we've talked about, there's different ways these can be implemented across the 27 member states, and that needs engagement with all of you to know what are the models that work for you, and how can we help your member states implement that as rapidly as possible.
And we've heard from Leonardo as well, his message about ambition and boldness, echoing the point I raised at the beginning, and a call for more Europe on this to avoid the tangible risk that's always there of patchwork implementation at member state level. What's your reflection on that?
Yeah, we don't like patchwork either. To some extent, we have a framework that tries to steer that. We have the network code regime within the electricity market legislation. But even within that, we can still end up with different national issues, circumstances. Sometimes these are legitimate, sometimes we think they're less legitimate. There does need to be flexibility there because we're not uniform. We need to seek the appropriate, efficient, sensible level of harmonization. And we strive for that with every breath, if you like. No, that's the more consistent we are across member states in implementation, we think the better it is. Yet we have to be sensitive to local circumstance.
Okay, clearly noted. Could we have a round of applause for our panel, ladies and gentlemen, please? And I'll cordially invite you to retake your seats in the front row, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we're a relatively short period now away from what I would call lunchtime. And to get us to lunchtime in an effective way, I want to bring together some of the many threads that we've been discussing here. So I'll bring up to the stage Bernard Raspaut, the Chief Executive of the European Copper Institute. Can we give him a round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen? So do join me. So we've heard a lot of discussion around the themes here, but I note also, from the industry side, a clear ask for action in the short term to deal with the energy price issue, and a lot of discussion around some of the options we have strategically moving forward to help unlock and resolve some of these issues. So what are your priority takeaways from what you've heard today so far? Could we have a handheld microphone, please?
Here it is.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
thank you.
Now it looks it's working. Can you hear me?
Wonderful,
Great.
good stuff. So,
Thanks.
over to you, Bernard. Priority takeaways from our debate so far today.
Well, one priority, because at the end of the day, what transpires from this panel discussion is this sense of urgency, which has been voiced by the industry. So we need a pragmatic, short-term solutions for electricity prices, because today this does hinder the competitiveness of the copper industry, the non-ferrous metals in Europe. And this actually then, as was illustrated also in terms of investments, this does hinder the potential contribution of all these metals, copper is one of them, which are really key to all these vast array of decarbonization technologies. So somehow we need that bold action to get out of what I feel is a dead-end street today. For the industry.
So you'd go as far as to say that we are currently in a dead-end street?
Well, we have a critical raw material act saying, let's produce more metals in Europe because we need them to decarbonize and to get to these green, resilient Europe. But on the other hand, we have production being curtailed because aluminium, silicon, zinc cannot produce at the current electricity prices in Europe.
So not only can we not currently keep production online, but we certainly can't ramp it up. And the business model or the business case is not, in your opinion, fully there. Okay, so that's the situation. Let's transform that then to focusing a little on solutions. So looking forward a little, with that state of play that you've defined, and we've heard echoed in the discussions as well, what do you see then as ways of solving this? What for you could be practical, feasible solutions, both with the optic on the now, but also the optic also looking forward?
Yeah. Well, short term, definitely there is this proposal which we have made jointly also with Eurometaux on these, what we call a valve, security valve mechanism or price shock absorber to avoid, without hitting without removing the marginal price setting, but in case we have crisis like we have gone now through, that we can have a temporary decoupling of these high peaks of gas prices so that electricity is not affected directly, I would say one-to-one, which is the case now. So that's one solution. The de-risking of PPAs, where the shaping cost is indeed quite an issue, the de-risking, well, why don't we invest money in that through maybe the European Investment Bank to have this de-risking mechanism that makes the predictability and the affordability of electricity for the industry to invest into the future. And as was mentioned by Mats earlier, it's also a question of enabling the industry to go where we have committed to go, and this is the pathway to net zero for the copper industry. We have committed in Europe and worldwide, all copper producers member of the International Copper Association, we have committed to get to net zero Scope 1 and 2 by 2050. We have committed to engage with the value chain to get Scope 3 as close as possible to net zero by 2050. But this requires investments. We're ready to make them. But where are we going to get the money for investments if, being a price taker, we see our cost, especially electricity, and we are electricity intensive, we see all these costs going up and up. This is all cash that you move away from these investments into decarbonization. So it gets into some kind of a vicious circle. So that's where we need bold initiatives, and we need to really get into making it happen. The Critical Raw Material Act is a good start. That's a good initiative. But to make it happen, this will require more bold action, because today with the electricity price we have in Europe, nobody is going to invest into metal production, into raw materials.
So the business case for you is simply not there in its current form?
No, I mean, if you have closed mines, why should you invest in these mines?
No.
If you don't have the cash generation capacity to invest into your decarbonization, well, you even don't think then about increasing your production. I mean, Mats mentioned a copper mine, 10 years, and typically 1 billion euro. So this is not insignificant money. And what is frustrating is that we have the resources in Europe. We have new projects, we have deposits we have identified that can produce more copper. We have the skills. We have the skills to be as efficient as possible in energy, as efficient as possible in environmental protection. But we don't have the conditions to work. There is a lot of red tape in regulations, long permitting times, and we have too high electricity prices. So this is what I call a dead end. So we need to think out of the box to get to solutions, to practical solutions.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper then into this thinking out of the box. What does it look like? Concretely, specifically in terms of steps, and steps with timelines.
Well, first urgency is let's get electricity prices to normal, and let's maybe do a compromise on the frameworks that we have today to define these market prices. Because sometimes it gives the impression that yes, the European market is functioning very well with the mechanism, but it has created an ivory tower, Europe, where everything goes well, but it's very high in terms of prices, and the rest of the world is offering alternatives to also investors in Europe. Look at the hydrolyzers that was supposed to be in Norway. It's going to be built in Michigan. So let's solve this first, but also, as was mentioned in the panel, I like that idea, and I think it's crucial. Let's talk together. Let's get this comprehensive European industrial policy in Europe with priority on strategic value chains, and I think these are identified through the Critical Raw Materials Act as far as raw materials are concerned. Let's work on this. Let's have a really comprehensive policy by resolving this equation, this compromise between environmental protection, communities, and business. And within the business, between producers of electricity, users of electricity. So we need to connect the dots. Otherwise, we're going to just beat around the bush. But time is going. Time is flying.
Call me a pragmatist. I think we all recognize that this dialogue, we also heard from different members of our panel about the need to sit down and really talk more, to unlock the possibility of renewable PPAs and all these different aspects. And the Commission's very clear, the message from Tom was super clear about the desire for consultation, the door being open, the flexibility being there to listen pragmatically to industry when it brings solutions to the table. But this, I hear a lot the call for consultation and the call for dialogue. But again, as a moderator of dialogue, as a mediator of dialogue, one of the things that comes into my mind when I hear that call is time. Because that type of dialogue takes time, yet we're at the same time talking about urgency. So are you talking about convening some kind of high-level round table? Are you talking about, and when would that happen? What form would this consultation take? Would it be the standard channels of we write our policy papers, we make our proposals, we share them? Or are you talking about something more radical than that?
I think we need to be more radical because it takes too much time to look. In the US, with the IRA, if you need money for your investments, covered by that, 3 weeks. In Europe, you need about 1 year.
Now, is that 3 weeks as a best case or 3 weeks as an average?
As an average.
As an average?
Yes.
And that compares to an average of 1 year in the EU?
Of 1 year, at least in the EU. So we need to go faster. We need to, again, that's part of the pragmatic approach. So we need to really look at concrete solutions. How can we support innovation? For example, in one, for me, very vital example is carbon capture, usage and storage. At the recent presentation by the oil and gas industry, they showed that all the solutions which are already on the market today, it's about 100 euros per ton of CO2 to capture, not to then transport and store, only to capture. At 80 euros CO2 price today, nobody is going to invest in this. And then, okay, yeah, maybe with PPAs, no, let's not do it so complex. Why don't we invest into research to find cheaper solutions to capture carbon instead of trying to have frameworks which take a lot of time in negotiation, but which at the end of the day are not going to work because, money talks. If I put CO2 in the atmosphere, I pay 80. If I take carbon capture, I pay more than 100. The choice is very, very easy.
Yeah.
So we should be pragmatic also in this business sense. But the business is ready to compromise on environment, on communities, of course. And this is what companies are doing. And again, our pathway is an example. But we need to get to action. We need to get to real action because, as you said, time is running. And instead of increasing the open strategic autonomy of Europe in raw materials, we're closing down plants who produce these raw materials. So that's the sense of urgency again.
That's the sense of urgency from you. So if you were to crystallize your thoughts on this, both from the copper but also the wider non-ferrous metals perspective, and to put it into a set of priority asks for the current and the next Commission, what would they be? Let's call it the famous postage stamp, the 1, 2, 3.
One is electricity prices back to competitive levels, to cheap energy, decarbonized, of course, in the long run. Second is, let's get into these fast-track dialogues on strategic projects in Europe, in raw materials, non-ferrous metals. Let's identify indeed, and I like the idea of let's have a strategic approach, and that's where the EU industrial policy should go into, is to say what are the sectors we really want to make sure these are living and growing and thriving in Europe. Well, in these sectors, let's have fast-track strategic projects where you put everybody around the table, policymakers, communities, NGOs, industry, but let's fast-track this to get them accepted, and let's not have this long red tape to try and get a permit to get a mine opened in Europe for more raw materials, or a recycling plant, because recycling is also part of the equation.
Okay, so a last question to you. Based on the current trajectory, maybe incorporating some elements of the asks you've just made, what's your realistic assessment of where you think we will be in 2030?
I'm an optimist by nature. I think, again, we have the resources, the capacities in Europe to be on a solid track to climate neutrality in 2030. But that will require a lot of efforts now, because now, from today till 2030, this is when most of the important decisions will have to be made. And we need to get the business in there. We need to get the business to say, I'm going to take the risk, because there's nothing like a riskless investment. I'm going to take the risk to invest in Europe because there is a good business case. So let's work on getting a good business case in Europe.
So that's the priority then, number one priority on the agenda for the policymakers now and moving forward is let's strengthen that business case through the different aspects that we've talked
Yes,
about.
in the strategic value chains that we need in Europe, if we want to be the green and resilient continent that we ambition to be. And we have the capacities, but we need to connect these dots.
Okay, so we have the capacity, a positive message to end on, but we still need more work on connecting those dots.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I now officially declare lunch. Thank you very much.